Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's Sticky Notes chat. I'm Amanda Stockwell. I'm here with Chris Notter today. Corey is actually doing research in the field, which we will chat about in a second.
Yeah.
Because what we're going to talk about today is doing research at a distance. How can we do our job when we can't get physically close to our participants? So we love talking about this kind of stuff, but we also want to get your questions. So feel free to ask them live in the session and LinkedIn, or if you're watching afterwards, you can send us your questions. We have a Twitter. It's just at Sticky Notes Chat. You can email us, chat@stickynoteschats.chat. You can go to our website. You can find any of us on LinkedIn. We're pretty willing
You're talking so
recipients.
fast, I can't keep up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, anyway, there are
Sure.
lots of ways to reach us. We're pretty willing recipients to have questions. So please do reach out to us. Otherwise, it'll just be Chris and I chatting, and we could do that anytime.
Yeah. Having the audience participation is something that makes this a whole bunch more, I was going to say more interesting. Amanda, it's always lovely talking with you, but yeah, I mean, and this is also a topical one, right? This is one that people really seem to be asking us questions about at the moment, is how can I do stuff when I can't be close to my users or close to my participants? So yeah, this should be fun.
Yeah, it should be a good one. So let me just begin by saying that it did not take a pandemic for me to do research where I wasn't physically close to my participants. I've been doing remote research pretty consistently for at least the last 12 years in some way, shape, or another. So maybe we should talk a little bit about what that means, what that looks like, kind of what some of the good experiences with that are, and what some of the not so good experiences are. So so first I just want to kind of ask you, Chris, like, what has your experience been like? Have you done much remote research or research at a distance, and what has that looked like for you?
Over the years, yeah. Recently, not so much. My role recently has been more helping people in person by doing training with them on site,
Mm.
and so that has kind of taken more of the priority over doing the remote research. The last pieces I did were actually unmoderated remote research. So, for instance,
Mm.
doing card sorts and reverse sorts, where I got people online. I recruited people online to go through doing a card sort and a reverse sort for me. Uh, those are great things for doing on a remote basis, because you've got the capacity to get quite a few people going through and getting the results, the number of results you need to try and form some kind of hypotheses without having to be there in person for all of them. I will say doing card sorts and remote sorts in person gives you another set of information as well, because it lets you know why people are sorting them the way they do, as well as how they're sorting them. But when you're more interested in just getting numbers, doing them remotely is awesome. My experience before that, I've done moderated sessions and non-moderated sessions remotely. Back when I started working at no, not when I started. I don't think there was I don't think there was actually good enough bandwidth to do anything remotely when I first started doing user research, and that kind of gives a date on when I was doing things, I guess. But when I started at Microsoft, the first product I worked on was NetMeeting, which was a video conferencing software. And so we actually did remote user sessions using NetMeeting to study NetMeeting, which got a bit
Oh.
recursive, and you had to factor in quite a bit of time for helping people support themselves through the process of sharing screens and things like that. But that's when screen sharing functionality even got into the product. But yeah, that was kind of interesting, doing that remote session stuff back when you pretty much had to know that the person on the other end was in an office, because if they were trying to do it from home, it was very unlikely it was going to work. There just wasn't the bandwidth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and they were using
Yeah.
their phone to be on the internet connection with you, so they couldn't use their phone to talk with you to troubleshoot what the problems were that they were having with the system.
Yeah.
Those things seem to have gone away a bit more recently, don't they? I mean, there doesn't seem to be so much of an issue with trying to get people into a chat or into
You
a
know,
live session.
Yeah, and you know, maybe we should just kind of like very briefly for anybody who's pretty new. I think everybody in 2020 knows what remote means. It means you're not physically in the same location
Yeah.
as another person. But maybe we should also talk about like moderated versus unmoderated. So
Mm.
moderated sessions are where you're, even though you're far apart from each other, you're still talking live. So you're in the same, at least digital presence at the same time. You're talking to somebody, you're guiding them through something, you're giving them tasks at hand. Whereas unmoderated means you set everything up, give people tasks, and you're not present when they are going through whatever the study is themselves. So it could be like as simple as a survey, it could be a card sort, like Chris mentioned, it could be there's unmoderated usability tests. That you can set up. We should talk about those a little
Yeah.
bit. Because and so I kind of want to put it out there. I'm a huge proponent of remote research. I always has been. But I think that, especially right now, people are trying to, it's the old, like, let me square peg, round hole, let me see what happens. And I think it's important to kind of talk about like the context within which it works really well and the context within, you know, you have to be kind of careful about the feedback you get and making sure that you're getting the right balance of things.
Yeah, there's definitely so it sounds to me like you're not a big fan of unmoderated usability sessions online.
Well, let me say this, they have their purpose. So
Yeah.
unmoderated usability tests, I think, are really great when you have something that's live and works, is, you know, like fully functioning, something where the tasks are relatively straightforward,
Hmm.
something where they're repeatable. So I used unmoderated usability tests a lot for doing like benchmarking
Yeah.
or for comparative, like comparing usability over time.
Yeah.
But I think that so much of the information that you collect from usability tests is outside of actually the specific usability tasks that that you usually write. You usually get information about people's context. You can dig in. You can follow up on things. You can get feedback if someone's like, "Yeah, I mean, I can figure out how to do that, but I never would in
Hmm.
real life."
Hmm.
All of that kind of extra contextual information that is very often the most useful bits that you get out of usability test. You don't have the opportunity often to get it. Sometimes you get little tidbits, but you don't have the opportunity to follow up with people usually. So you don't have the opportunity to uncover things like, well, would you really do this in real life? I mean, you can
Hmm.
ask them, but it's not the same. You don't get the same richness in feedback. So
Yeah, and benchmark studies, I think, is an ideal situation for that. Or if you are trying to give a team that doesn't have regular usability support at least some data that they can kind of compare over time as to see whether they're making improvements as they release different versions of their product. But all it is giving you is a set of information, a set of numbers. Yeah, sure, there are some products out there which claim to give you more than that, but basically it boils down to numbers because that's all you can really collect. You can't collect the qualitative information in the same way. So yeah, for the unmoderated studies, it just seems to me it's a sad thing for me when when you're doing those, because you're not getting as much data from a participant. You've recruited a participant, you've got them to run a set of tasks for you, but you're only getting half the information back from them that you could get. And to me, that's like, no, I want the rest of it, please. So yeah, that's why
yeah.
moderated sessions, although they require you to be there, and so they take more of your time, the payback is, for me, is so much more worth it than running the unmoderated ones.
Yeah, I will also point out that if, for instance, you're doing like an unmoderated usability test, you still usually have to go back and watch the
Yeah,
sessions, which
yeah,
may be shorter than a moderated study, but in grand length of time,
yeah,
I don't find that they're actually, it sometimes can be faster to get results in because depending on, the tool you're using or how you've set it up, you can, potentially set something up in an afternoon and have
yeah,
6 videos waiting for you the next morning. But you still have to spend those 6 hours rewatching the videos and taking notes and kind
Well,
of going through.
I'll say you do because you actually care.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Yes.
and Amanda, I mean, what you're really talking
Fair
about
point.
there, what you're talking about there is making sure that your participants really were recruited correctly and they were representative of who you needed them to be, that they did make an effort to complete the tasks, that
Yeah.
when they did complete the tasks, they were doing so in a way that was along the lines you thought they would, rather than going around the houses to do it but still getting to the end result, which would be a check in the box, but it would, if you were moderating that session, you'd be going, maybe this isn't working exactly how we thought it was. That new feature we put in, they didn't use that at all. They used
Didn't
5
find
old
it
features.
at
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you're still doing with as you check those unmoderated sessions that you'd have got for free by doing a moderated session. So unless you're needing a large N sample for some crazy reason, me and large N samples don't get on very well. I'm not sure whether that's just because I'm grumpy about running that many sessions, or whether I just don't. I think part of me doesn't see much purpose for running regular usability sessions to try and get some kind of statistical significance. What I'm trying to do is help teams move forwards. And so a small N sample is sufficient for that most of the time.
Yeah,
So yeah,
sure.
I'd much rather run a small N in person than a large N for the purpose of just being able to run it in the background. But there are times when you want to, like you said, benchmarking, comparative or competitive usability testing, where you just want to do some comparisons between different versions or different products that are out there. It makes sense that in those situations. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was specifically talking about usability testing. I think I have
Yes.
found, for some other methods like card sorting or testing or reverse card sorting, sometimes you do want more of just a count. Like sometimes you do want just more of a number, and so it's okay if you're just trying to get, some hard data. The other thing that I have run into recently is I'll do a shorter, smaller round of moderated sessions and then
Yep.
some unmoderated stuff to back it up.
to boost the numbers, as it were. Yeah, and I think that's fine. It's about how much variance you're expecting in your results, and with a card sort or a reverse sort, it's very likely that different people will have different approaches to the study. Just for people who don't know, card sorting and reverse sorting are ways of working out an information architecture. It's getting people to say where a thing would appear in a hierarchy of information, so you can then create an information architecture around it. So yeah, with that, there's lots of different places that a thing could live in different people's minds. So you need a lot of people's input in order to work out what the best potential places are for that thing to live in an information architecture. Then if you are needing the big N sample size for your usability test, sure, run the numbers after you've seen that you're not getting too much variance. If you do get a lot of variance in your participants with a usability session, you've got a problem with your session, either with the tasks you created or with the software that you're testing, that needs to be fixed before you go any further. Because if you're getting a lot of variance with that, it means you'll never get a set of results that you can give recommendations based on, because you're just seeing stuff. Some people are over here, some people are over here. Yeah. So what other types of things have you run usability tests for, or sorry, run remote sessions for?
Yeah, sure. So I'll go ahead and kind of, maybe one thing that would be helpful to talk about is the context within which I work. So I'm a consultant, which means that I work with all kinds of different organizations all over the world. So for instance, about 2 years ago, I was working with a team in New Zealand. And while I would have loved to visit them multiple times, it just wasn't really that feasible. It just wasn't really that feasible. And even part of the reason they wanted to work with me is because they wanted to get more coverage in places that were awake when I was typically. So they wanted to talk to people from across the United States and Canada and Europe a little bit too. So one of the really great things about conducting remote research is that you have such an opportunity to connect with different kinds of users all over the place for whatever variety of reasons it would be difficult to meet with in person. So sometimes it's a straight up budget situation, right? Like I do have some, but I don't have many clients who are going to fly me to New Zealand every time they want to talk to me
I
or
want
have
those
me meet with
clients.
users.
I will fight you for those clients.
Yeah, I'm not giving them up. But it's sometimes just a straight up budget restriction. Sometimes it's a matter just of time. So another project I'm working on right now, one of the groups of people that we need to talk to are clinical researchers and oncologists. Well, they don't really have a whole lot of free time. And even if you pay them, compensate them very well, they're not really that likely to like drive into a facility and hang out with you, even under, ignoring the pandemic, ignoring everything else that's going on right now. But it's not that difficult to get them to spend 30 minutes on the phone with you. It's a lot lower of an ask. It's a lower barrier of entry. And also just in terms of diversity of, like able-bodiedness. Maybe somebody can't drive, or maybe somebody can't climb up the steps to your office. Then there's, you still have to be careful that you're making sure you get a wide variety that's representative of your user base. And of course, my typical, it wouldn't be a sticky notes chat if I didn't say it depends, because it does. It depends what you're working on, who you want to make sure you talk to. But there's all sorts of people who, a good example is I used to work at Staples Corporate, which had offices outside of Boston. But if you're from that area, that you know that a couple of miles can take a really long time to get to. Boston is notorious for traffic. Right. And, Framingham was kind of far outside of the city. And so somebody might have been in a target area, but actually like an hour and a half away, which meant that asking them to come for a 1 hour session was really asking them to invest about 5 hours.
We actually had the same problem, a similar problem based on location when I was working at Microsoft, which was Microsoft had, when I was working there, when I started, actually I'm thinking by the time I left, there was probably around 150, 200 user researchers running studies a lot. So we'd exhausted the local participant pool. You would start seeing the same people coming in for your sessions again. You'd be like,
yeah,
don't I know you? Oh no, you met my twin brother. So it becomes an issue. You've got to expand your network somewhere. So I see what you're saying about the Boston situation. The traffic's horrible, but how can you pull from a larger area? And remote is a way of doing that, right?
Yeah. The other thing that would happen is that, it was at the time that I worked there, I think about like 5,000 people who worked on campus. And so even if we would drive, 20 minutes away to another location, everybody knew somebody who worked there. So you'd say, yeah, I'm like from Staples Corporate. And they'd be like, oh, do you know my cousin? And I'd be like, nope. But there was definitely sort of not just, it's great, going remote is great, not just to get geographic diversity, but if you're in the hometown office of a big company, the chances are really high that people in the area have some sort of affiliation with you already, negative or positive. And you really want to try to get, kind of like a fresh perspective, which sometimes can be hard to do in person. So that's, and also sometimes you just frankly don't have the ability to get in touch with people locally. There's been products that I've worked on where they were based in the US, but most of their user base was in Europe. Again, it would have been cool to go to Europe, but it just wasn't feasible. And I would rather get my my clients and get like some good information by talking to people remotely than by saying, well, we just don't have budget for that. Sorry, too bad.
I've also had problems in the past with getting clearance to be on a site. Surprisingly, they were happy for me to do a remote session where I was connecting with the person over a technological channel, but I couldn't physically be in that location. So those situations, again, that's where you can use remote remote studies as a way around that. Um, you mentioned one a couple of weeks back that you were doing, which doesn't even really require that much in the way of technology, and it's a remote way of doing usability research, and that was diary studies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so diary studies are one of my favorite things to
They're
do
pretty
if I can
cool.
set them up well. Yeah, yeah, they're very fun. So for those again who don't know, we're not gonna. This is not a methods sticky notes chat, but for those who don't know, a diary study is basically what it sounds like. You ask people to take a diary, and you can either send them specific prompts at specific kinds of times of the day, or you can say, like whenever you order something from this store, you answer these 3 questions about it or something. And it's a way for you to get longitudinal data from people, and get some information about their actual experience in context. And there are tools that can, set up for you to do this, but you can also literally have them send you an email or fill out a very simple survey form. Or, the first time I ever did it, I literally just had an email inbox where everybody's responses were filtering to, and they were prompted to send me an email at the end of every work day. It was a work, a business context use, but and so there are all kinds of cool tools where you can have people video themselves and interact with products, but it doesn't have to be super high tech.
No.
It can be.
My first one I did, I sent people video cameras and little videotapes. This was back in the day when tapes fitted in video cameras. And every week they'd send me back the tape, and I'd be sending them a new one, and we did that for a couple of months, and which is a long time to get somebody to do that kind of thing. They were very committed to what we were doing, but it also one of the problems with doing video is you have to watch it all. At least with if it's a text thing or a survey response that's coming back, you can tabulate it much more easily. But yeah, you can do it so many different ways. And I was relying on snail mail to get the video cassettes backwards and forwards between me and the participants. But yeah, there's many different ways of doing it. I've investigated recently some apps that can even do geolocation when you're in a certain place, or when you're traveling, or when you're doing certain things. It will prompt you to answer some questions. Diary studies are a great way of doing something that's asynchronous. It's unmoderated. It doesn't need you to be there. It gives you great insight into people's behaviors. A bit like being a fly on the wall and kind of just watching them doing those things. Not quite as much as if you're there in person doing an ethnographic study or an observation, but it's a great alternative to that if you can't do those kind of things in person.
For sure.
So you love diary studies by the sound of things.
I do, and again, it depends on the context. They're not always appropriate, but diary studies are one of my favorite ways to. It can't exactly replace. And let me just be clear. In general, although I'm very much a proponent of remote research, I don't think there's ever going to be a full substitute for in-person sessions, especially ethnography. Depending on the context, it's really, really important and helpful to be able to see somebody use something in the real way and real place that they would be using it, and to observe not just how they're using it, but who else they're talking to and what are they distracted by. And, depending on what you're working on, things like where are the lighting conditions and all kinds of stuff that you can't simulate. But diary studies, to me, are one of the best ways to either, if you can't do ethnography because of something like, I don't know, a pandemic, or but sometimes it's just budget concerns, or sometimes it's availability of participants. Diary studies are a really great way to get in context feedback from people in a way that seems like less intrusive and less time consuming. And people tend to be pretty honest in diary studies. They tend to be, you tend to get pretty honest snapshots of people's lives, which, depending on the scenario of the ethnography, it can be a little bit harder to do because people can feel a little bit overwhelmed by having people in their space, or, especially if it's their home. It can feel a little intrusive.
and they feel like they have to be on best behavior for you too, because they're inviting you into their house or into their place of work, and they feel like they have to demonstrate things rather than just doing their jobs. Yeah, you're right. I mean, diary studies really do give people the opportunity to be quite personal about their feelings about things. I found people opening up a lot more when they're just typing it onto a computer or even on videotapes to me than they would if they were talking to me directly. So yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
way of doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that, yeah, it's definitely a great way of doing it. And again, I just want to be sort of clear. I put my stake in the ground of, I don't think in-person research is ever going to be able to be completely replaced. But I don't want anybody to feel like can't get insights about something because they can't talk to somebody face to face. You can, for pretty much everything I've done in person, there is a way to get at least some of the information remotely. And one of the other things I like to kind of recommend to people who are newer to remote research is, because it tends to be cheaper and faster to conduct, sometimes it means you have the flexibility to, maybe you can do a diary study and some follow-up interviews, or you can get budget to include more people, or you can do, some competitive utility testing and some follow-up card sorting. Like you can use different methods or complementary methods to try to look at information multiple ways. And in some cases, honestly, you even end up getting more information over time by being able to do smaller pieces of iterative work, even if you don't get as much the first time out of it that you want. It's always a balance, but I think, and Chris, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, but I think I'm very much a proponent of pragmatic research and pragmatic insight gathering. And, if I had unlimited time, budget, energy, etc., and only one client at a time, well, sure, I would do things differently, but that's not the world I live in.
I hate to be, I know that there's always a bit more kind of entertainment value for people watching when there's a little bit of back and forth between us, but everything she said, which you're that side, aren't you? Everything she said, because it's true. I don't think that you can quite expect to get the same fidelity of information from remote sessions as you can from in person. But you can interpolate several data sources to get to something approaching that fidelity by running different kinds of remote sessions. You'll get something approaching that face-to-face interaction from doing a video session. You'll get some data about the frequency of how something occurs from looking at some analytics information. All these things you can interpolate between these different sources to get to paint a better picture of what your user behavior is all about. And that's what we're doing, right? We're looking at user behavior. We're trying to find out how people behave. Obviously, one of the best ways of doing that is to go and watch them. Sometimes even that isn't enough, and that's why we also rely on things like analytics, surveys. It's not like we're only running these remote sessions because we can't do in person. Things like card sorts, things like diary studies are things which we've always done and we always will do because they're a great assistance in learning new things about people that you can't get from just a one visit that you go on to somebody or one time they come in and play with your software for an hour or an hour and a half. I think any time where we're bringing people in to run a study, it's a slightly artificial environment. Anytime where we're going out to watch people in their own environment, I prefer doing that. But again, you're only doing it for a short space of time. You may or you may not see those behaviors that you're really interested in. Your hope is you do. More importantly is the things you don't know. You may not see the thing which is actually that real problem point for that person. But when you interpolate between several different kinds of study, it's more likely you're going to pick that kind of stuff up too.
For sure. And I would also say that there have been times I've been able to get things remotely that I don't think people would have felt comfortable telling me in
Oh.
person.
But
Like
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't,
Yes.
as friendly and lovely as I am, and as good of a job as I do making people feel comfortable, there's a like quite a large body of study actually about how people feel very comfortable opening up quite quickly to robotic interfaces, basically, whether they know there's a person behind it or not. And additionally, I will say that I have run remote studies where I was able, because I'm recording the screen of their face, even if in like a live session I'm recording the session, I don't usually have such a close up of a face as I do when I'm running remote sessions. And I have caught some serious grimaces. I've caught what very nearly looked like a tear.
Oh,
um,
oh, oh.
it was terrible. It was terrible, but it was great for me
Yes,
to use that emotion.
yes.
And there is something to be said for, if I go to present to a bunch of stakeholders, people were really frustrated. 8 out of 10 of them couldn't find things. It depends how you present it, but if you have a
Yeah.
giant blown up picture of somebody grimacing horribly,
You
or
made your users cry.
yeah,
Yeah, that'll do it.
emotion, yeah, emotion can be quite powerful trigger for when you're trying to inspire change after the fact. And the other thing that I haven't really touched on yet with remote sessions is that although there are always, you have to be careful and you have to make sure everyone's on mute and all that stuff. I find it easier to get people to come and observe remote sessions
Oh.
than live sessions.
But you bring
They might.
you bring cookies to the live sessions. I mean, what do you do for
I know. I bring snacks to the live sessions, but I think it's because um, it's okay if you multitask a little bit
Mm-hmm.
when you're an observer of, like a remote session. It's okay if you have to jump in for half an hour, but have to leave, for a call,
Right.
or you're answering email or something. And while, of course I would love it if all of my all of my stakeholders and observers were intently watching. I know that that's just really not that reasonable of a request. And so I would rather have them come for 30 minutes than not at all.
Yeah.
Or I would rather have them come and also be answering email than not at all. So I think it depends. I think there's pro cons. I also think right now we're in a interesting space where people are reevaluating what attention looks like and reevaluating what presence looks like. So we've talked about presence before, but I mean presence in terms of attention, right? Like,
Yes.
where are you focused? And we could and probably should have a whole nother session where we're talking about attention and multitasking and all of that stuff. But it's, I don't know, I guess I would, in terms of stakeholder engagement or team member engagement, I would rather have half of someone's attention than zero.
So Sam's saying, I've been a participant and it's nice to have a snack. We were actually talking about
Oh.
bribing the team to turn up to the sessions by giving them pizza or cookies or candy
Snacks,
works, but
yes.
they get a bit fed up with candy because I think there's candy around the office most of the times too, at
I
least in
used to
regular times.
bake. Yeah, I used to
You would
bake, and I
make
would,
your
and
and they
I was even trickier than this. Listen up, y'all. Pro tip: I would half bake what I was making at home, and I would finish it in the toaster oven in the office.
so the
or
smell was permeating the whole office.
or if it was a research facility, there's one in particular I'm thinking of that also has taste test facilities. I would ask them to warm things up for me, and people were only allowed to have said snack if they came and watched the session. It worked
So
quite well.
So fudge, I'm thinking like hot chocolate fudge brownie kind of smell
Mm.
or hot cookie smell. Oh,
Banana
oh,
bread was a popular one. Yeah.
oh. Can I come and watch some of your sessions, please? So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's what you do when you're in person. What about, so you're saying that you can get people to watch when you're doing remote sessions because they feel like they've got kind of the time, they can devote their time partly to that and partly to email too. I guess that's a good point. They can watch it in a kind of a corner until something interesting happens. There's a lot of not downtime, but non-task time during a session, isn't there?
Yeah.
And so if that gives them the opportunity to watch even multiple sessions just in the background, I guess it's still raising their awareness of what the user issues are. It'd be nice if one of the tools had something that could kind of flash a big red alert thing in the background, so that they could all see when you can push a button and say, "Hey, you should be watching this bit right now." But I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw this. We should be answering this question.
Yeah. So speaking of attention,
yes,
this question just popped up about A/B testing live in production versus A/B testing through usability testing before launch. Okay, let's discuss. Chris, what are your thoughts on A/B testing?
I think A/B testing can give you good results if you've got a very clear question that's very answerable by something you can do by funneling people to different locations. I don't think there's much point in trying to ask people for their opinions about whether they prefer option A or option B in a usability study, because yes, you can do it, but I'm not sure I believe the results. I've never really seen that work very well unless there's such a big difference that it was obvious which was the answer anyway.
Yeah.
And also with that side of things, I want the team to make a decision about what they think their best design is. We'll usability test that. There are still going to be some issues with it. Then we'll find what those issues are, and we will resolve those issues to make the interface better. And it might even involve putting some of the parts from option B into the interface. But either way, it's not really, even if you run between subjects design, where some people see option A, some people see option B, you'd need to run so many people in order to make any real sensible conclusions about which option was better. Why would you do that with a usability test? That's not really, to my way of thinking, that's not what usability testing is for. The way I prefer to use usability testing is to find issues, help the team understand why the issues exist, so that they can then go off, fix them, make a better version, and then we'll run another iterative study a couple of days later if necessary, just to check that those fixes worked, rather than trying to do A/B testing. A/B testing is something you can do for should the button be blue or green, if you really want to do that kind of thing. But really, I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's my take on it. Amanda, have you ever seen a good use for it for usability testing?
Well, what I was going to say is I have occasionally seen or been a part of projects where, we've done that sort of initial study. We know what the core problems are, and there's a serious debate about what is the best solution. Yep. And sometimes it's as simple as, a small interaction. Sometimes it's a bigger level question. And so I agree and to disagree with you. I don't think A/B testing is the way to answer when it's those bigger level questions. I don't call it A/B testing. I've done comparative usability testing, right, where I've walked through some different versions of a prototype or some different, solutions for architecture. I've done some of that comparative testing where we have gotten really valuable feedback where people are like, this really matched the way that I thought about breaking this down. This one I couldn't figure out at all. And sometimes what we were able to do was to tease out like, oh, actually we had different personas that we didn't realize that we had. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how they split.
And you're talking about in person. When you're doing this in person, right? Because you're
moderated, but not in person.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Moderated sessions. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because that was something I was thinking about earlier on, was the fact that you can learn more about whether you got your personas right by the people you recruited from a session. Yep. So that point about personas is important there. I think, okay, I'll backtrack a little bit on what I said about A/B testing. If I could, well, no, I would still say if you've got that kind of issue, yeah, it can be handy to do that. I'm not sure it's necessarily, I'd rather have the team fight it out and come up with what they think they want to have tested first. If that doesn't work, we'll go and test option B. But I'd rather...
Well, yeah, so here's my caveat of the day. It depends on what is the group dynamic, what are the politics of the situation. I have done a comparative test where we kind of knew which one was better.
Yep.
But we needed some data to say that.
Yes.
We weren't going to be able to move forward without
Right.
testing two options. So
Yes.
I will cede your point that I think that it's ideal if you can get everybody behind, like, here's what we think we should do, and then iterate on that. But I've had situations where we sort of needed to do some comparative testing.
And that's a different situation. You're running a comparative
Yes.
test not because you wanted to run a comparative test. You're running a comparative test because of politics.
Yes. Yeah, but that's an important consideration
it's
in
valid.
all of this work.
It's valid, especially, I mean, when you're in an organization as an employee of an organization, it's a point which you can kind of get around by gaining trust over time. When you're a consultant, you don't necessarily have the time to gain that trust and get people to understand that that you're always right. Damn it! No,
Obviously.
obviously. But so in those situations, yeah, politics gets in the way. Politics is actually should be probably the title of another one of these things we run. But
yes, indeed.
But when politics does get in the way, often we will end up doing things that aren't necessarily for the benefit of us learning new stuff, but it's for the benefit of convincing team members. I actually have run studies. I've conducted site visits in the past just to get important team members out seeing participants. I already know what the result's going to be because we've run a similar study in the past. We've done similar site visits in the past, but we needed people to see it.
Yep.
To me, that's not a usability study, that's a demo, although we're still running it very much as a usability study, so yeah.
That's an undercover. Yeah.
And it's very valid. I mean, if that's what it takes to move the product forward, that's what it takes to move the product forward. And I will run that if I have to. It makes me sad because it's not a waste of participants. It's obviously a very good use of participants. But when you have a limited pool of people you can draw from to run studies with, using them for a situation which is political rather than for actually gaining user research insights is very sad, but necessary sometimes. Yeah.
Sometimes. I want to point out another couple of quick things about sort of the idea of like A/B testing or comparative testing. I have done some like comparative impression tests where we knew the sort of like fundamentals, but we were more talking about like the impressions of the visual design and that matched the like brand guidelines that we were going for. And so in that case where you're literally asking people things like, pick the 3 adjectives that best describe this interface, and you do that a couple of times. That's a very different kind of thing than a usability study. So there are times when that's useful. The other thing about live A/B testing that gets ignored a lot, but is true, is that what if your B or A does worse than the status quo? That's a thing. And sometimes that's good learning, but you have to be in the situation where you understand that that may be the case. You have the sort of flexibility to do that, and that everybody has the same expectations. Because I personally wasn't involved, but I have been party to or observed situations where A/B tests have gone horribly wrong, and the proposed solution was much worse for the intended outcome than the original solution. And so that is basically my pitch for saying, don't A/B test that somebody said is a good idea without having done some other research on it first.
Right.
Like, just do some usability testing, do some, and narrow your focus. But don't start with an A/B test as your way of figuring out what works and doesn't. Have informed decisions about what your users might want, what their goal might be, and how to best serve that. And look at it as fine-tuning, not big exploration. That's my
that goes to the big issue, the big concept of interpolating from different data sources. You've got your what data from A/B testing, you've got your why data from observation, from usability testing, and the two of them together can say, well, yeah, this one performed better. Well, why did it perform better? Well, we've got no clue. It just performed better. But then if you watch the usability results, you'll see why it performed better, because people didn't even get to that page in option A, and they did in option B, or whatever it was, or they just liked it better, or it fitted their way of thinking about the world better, or whatever it was. Without that information, you can't make you can change your interface, but you can't know why you're changing it, and you can start making incremental changes into mediocrity rather than into big improvements. And I'd always go for the big improvements if you can.
Yeah, for sure. So we're nearing the end of time. It just goes by so quickly when you're having fun. So Chris, I want to kind of ask you, like, what is your final thought if someone's, like newer to remote research, or kind of exploring it, or is kind of skeptical, or just trying to figure out the best methods? What would you say to people?
Get a grounding in how research works before you try doing remote research, because if you don't understand what you need to do to perform good research in person, you're adding an extra layer of difficulty when you do it remotely. If you don't understand how to write good questions, then your survey will not give you data back. If you don't understand how to write a recruiting, the questions for recruiting the right people, so that you know who you want to even have in your study, you won't be able to find the online participants that you need. If you can't write a study plan and get the questions in the right order so that you lead people into the tasks you want them to do, your remote session won't work, because you won't be able to get people to do the tasks you want them to do. So having that grounding in regular research practices then allows you to go into remote research with some confidence. Whereas if you don't have that grounding, you just think, oh, this is a quick way of getting things done. Anybody could do this. Look, I can click this button and I can sign up and I can pay them money and they'll do this thing for me. You'll get garbage out if you put garbage in.
Yeah, totally agree. Garbage in, garbage out. And you can find gold, you can get really good insights, but I would say that you have to be extra prepared. You have to plan extra well. You have to test more. You have to make sure, you have to put in, it's like leveling up, right? Basically,
Yes.
Whenever you're going to do something remotely, it's an extra level harder. So make sure you've got that good baseline. Make sure you have clear research goals. To Chris's point, I mean, anyone can just log in and pay some people money, but that doesn't mean you're going to get anything useful out of it. So when in doubt, make sure you actually know about research first, and then dig into the
or hire somebody who does, right? I mean, that's the plug for people like us, but it's also that you can also get a pretty much, these days there are some online services that offer pretty much a handheld service from beginning to end. It costs you money. It's not necessarily cheaper running online research than it is running it in person when you're doing it that way. But I would definitely do that rather than doing it myself if I didn't understand the basics of how to run research.
Yeah, I would say that a little bit of expense in research is a lot less expensive than making decisions based on poor data.
Oh yes.
So with that, I think that may conclude. We're just going to leave it there. Hire one of us instead of getting crappy data.
I'm down with that one, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this week's Sticky Notes chat. As always, hit us up. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You can go to stickynotes.chat. That's our website. You can watch this later. If you do have questions, you can follow up with that. And you can find us on Twitter, any of those things. And Chris and I will be back next week. Corey's going to be out again one more week, but I promise he's coming back. We have not kicked him out. He's just traveling.
I don't know if we could kick him out if we tried, could we? I wouldn't want to, but
no, we don't want to. No. All right, so Chris, what's on the agenda for next week? What do you think?
Oh, good grief! We do have one. Let me remember what it was. Hang on. Let me go to.
Sorry,
let me go to stickynotes.chat and tell you. Oh, next week we're talking about different UX certifications. So this is a question that. Oh my goodness! Yeah, I get asked this a lot. should I go do a boot camp? Should I go do one of these classes that gives me certification? Should I go do some other university thing? There was a big announcement from Google just this week, actually,
I
about
think
them
it was
earlier this week, about them offering a certification that they are going to count as the equivalent of a 3 or 4 year degree. So
we will discuss.
Yes, I think unfortunately this is going to be one where again we're in violent agreement about what we think about these things. But yeah, you can tune in for our perspectives on this next week.
Our 2 cents.
Same time, same place. 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 o'clock Eastern on Thursday, the 23rd.
Yes. All right. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye, Chris.
Oh, and I wish I could actually end this. Here we go. Boink.